Lawmakers addressed turmoil at the state capitol after Republican Party members walked out during Wednesday's caucus meeting.
WIFR News reporter Sydney Stoffrigan talks with representatives of both parties on the issues leading to the turn of events and the criticism of President Donald Trump.
Absolutely positively stupid.
Illinois Republicans slam state Democrats for what they call political theater. They accuse the opposing party of flooding Wednesday's legislative session with politically charged resolutions. So the GOP lawmakers decided to walk off the House floor.
And those resolutions were nothing but bashing the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
State Representative John Cabello says Democrats steered away from a budget discussion to condemn Trump for pardoning January 6 protesters and accuse him of making decisions that hurt many Americans.
Wasting taxpayers' dollars by being in that chamber and spewing hate-filled rhetoric. Why sit in there and listen to that?
State Representative Dave Vella explains Democrats only shared the concerns of scared constituents.
And we'll keep bringing it up because our constituents ask for it, and hopefully the Republicans will be there to counter our arguments or to agree with us.
He believes both parties want what is best for Illinois, but he says leaving without debate doesn't help.
As long as we can have the debate, as long as we can talk, that's how good government happens.
Both sides return to the chamber Thursday. Cabello says lawmakers must now focus on Illinois taxpayers, not the national debate.
There are things that we need to do to make sure that the tax burden is relieved off of the taxpayers instead of putting more taxes on them.
In Rockford, Sydney Stoffrigan, WIFR News.
Speaker of the House Chris Welch responded to the walkout, saying Republicans are not here to talk about what's coming out of Washington, D.C. What's coming out of Washington, D.C. can be summed up in one word: fascism.
On the other side of the aisle, House Minority Leader Tony McCombie says House Republicans stood together for working families across Illinois and against the petty political games of the majority party.